We found that hobbies are kind of like an entry level to those who are just the beginners of trying to find self-care or refine them after babies. I think hobbies are something that are in most cases very tangible, very in front of your face and very visible to those around you. So when your family sees you doing the hobby, they kind of become aware of like, okay, I need to give mom that time, like give her space. And then as you yourself, mom, start to get more comfortable with yourself, get more comfortable with taking that time for yourself, you'll find that you kind of start to move a little bit almost above the hobby level and kind of go into other arenas of self-care. And you just kind of become comfortable with guilt. And the word guilt isn't really there anymore. It's more just my time. I'm just a person being a person.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Perda. As a marriage coach who's married with 3 kids, I know how much parenthood could change a marriage. If flirting, laughing, and having fun together feels like a thing of the past, then I'm here to teach you that marriage doesn't have to feel so hard with your parents, and your marriage can thrive even when you're in the season of raising kids. Whether you're in a good place in your marriage and you just want to continue growing together, or you're wondering if you even like your spouse anymore, this podcast has something for you. Join me here each week as we dive into what it takes to help your marriage grow, and maybe even do a 180. You'll learn ways to handle conflict better, bring that spark back into your relationship, as well as learn how to improve other areas of your life from my lovely guest experts. Are you ready for the next stage of your life and marriage? Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood podcast. Today you are in for a treat because not only do I have one guest, but I have 2 guests. Woo-hoo! And they are actually co-hosts of an incredible podcast that you need to check out. But we're going to talk about that later. Mm-hmm. So today we're going to be diving into this topic of hobbies. Do you have one? Do you think your kids are your hobby? We're going to get into whether that counts and why it's important for you to have a hobby and how it's going to help you thrive through motherhood instead of just feeling like you're surviving. So without further ado, Tam, Erin, please let us know who you are, where you live, how old your kids are, and how did you get started in this journey of really trying to help moms get into the world of hobbies for themselves?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Erin.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. Sure, I will start. So my name's Erin, and I live in St. Louis, Missouri. And me and Tam have been friends for many years. So we go way back to, college years.
Yeah.
So I am almost 40, mom of 2, have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I'm also a working mom. I'm a dentist, so I own a dental practice. So, very busy. I've been a very high achiever my whole life. And about a year ago, me and Tam started having a lot of conversations about just feeling like, our kids are starting to get a little bit older. We're starting to have a little bit more time, but we've spent so long engrossed in work and family life that we had completely lost who we are as people, and had, you could call it a midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it.
Yes, I'm calling it that.
We're not in the middle of our life
something
right
like that. So, we just had many conversations about we really just need to do something. We feel like we need to take back some time for ourselves, but how do we do that? And, we started, I was going through a very stressful time in my life with work and family, just juggling everything. And Tam has some other kind of similar reasons, but different reasons as well for us joining together. And we can get into that. But for me, it was finding something that was like, I was accountable to, that I really was passionate about, that just helped to grow me as a person, but also just it was mine and mine alone and not my kids or my husband or, anything else. And so it evolved into the Art of Hobbyness, and, we're kind of just starting out this podcast and brand, and it's been a really fun journey so far. And we've really enjoyed connecting with other women and just finding that a lot of people feel this way, and we're not alone in that. And so, that's kind of where we're at, And so, I don't know, Tam, you want to share how about your side of things?
Yes. Like she said, we're same but different. Both high achieving women in our late 30s. I too have young kids, 8 and 5. And my issue is my kids are starting to get a little bit more independent and starting to need me less. So I'm starting to notice some free time on my hands. But I don't know what to do with that free time. I just kept, defaulting to doom scrolling and Netflix and started feeling kind of bad about myself that those were my pleasures. So I kind of did some observing of my husband, and the guy has like 7 hobbies. Like at any point in time that he has any free time, he can just pick up one and go. And to be honest, I kind of got a little jealous. So I was like, Erin, I think I know what we should try to do to try to help us explore ourselves a little bit more, but also help me personally find something interesting for myself, something that I can explore for myself during that downtime. And that's when we kind of came upon hobbies. We were like, maybe that's the thing. So we thought we would start a podcast, kind of almost like a diary, just to hold ourselves accountable for trying hobbies, reporting those hobbies back to our listeners, and then also interviewing people with interesting hobbies. Ironically, the podcast itself became a hobby, so that's actually our main hobby now. But yeah, it's been really great trying to see how I can find self-care through hobbies, and I'm learning a lot about myself creatively, because I used to think I was a very, business-oriented, high-achieving, businesswoman. And then getting into the hobby aspect, I'm realizing I actually really enjoy some color in my life. I would like more color, please.
Yeah, I feel like after we become moms, we just like take on this persona that we have to be more serious and responsible and AKA boring.
Boring.
And
how do you make friends? Nobody wants to be friends with somebody who's boring.
What?
I don't
exactly. But we like take the responsibility so seriously that we forget to like put ourselves on the plate of like things to consider, like, oh, because we're always planning for our kids. Oh, what should they wear? What should they do? What would make this a fun weekend for them? We're like, well, what would be fun for us too? Like, can we incorporate ourselves into that consideration?
Absolutely.
So let's dive into what the hell is a hobby even? Because I feel like if we really define it, people are gonna be like, oh shit, what I do is not actually a hobby. It's me being a mom.
That's
a great point.
Yeah. I think that like we have kind of come to find that a hobby, the definition of a hobby is actually something pretty simple, and it's anything that brings you joy or happiness that really doesn't necessarily have a goal. And it can be productive or it can be consumptive. It can be watching TV can be a hobby, but it has a time and place. But there's so many other things that people don't realize are hobbies, and you can find joy through simple things in life and fit them into your life, even as a busy mom.
Oh yeah. Like for instance, we actually had an episode in which we kind of sat and wrote down all the things that bring us joy just in our daily life, just kind of monitored ourselves for like a week. And in doing that, I actually, prior to this podcast would have claimed I'm somebody who doesn't have hobbies. And I'd be like, I'm so lame. No one wants to be friends with me. And then after we sat down and kind of wrote out things that we enjoy, I kind of started to see a pattern. I was like, well, actually, I really enjoy my plants. I like my plants. I water them. That's kind of a hobby. I mean, they're dying a lot, so I'm not successful at the hobby, but I've got them. They do bring me joy. I think it's just make sure you just listen to yourself. And it also takes a lot of breaking down barriers of perfectionism. I think if you can break through that, that'll also help you with finding your hobbies.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're going to take that definition, some might say, I thoroughly enjoy being with my kids.
Yes, that is true.
What would you say about that?
I would say that, for some people, that's really great. That's for them. Do you feel that your cup is half full? Or full? I'm sorry, not half full. Do you feel like it's filling your cup? Do you feel that you're getting pleasure out of it? Like, are you doing this because you are only trying to make the kids happy, or are you doing this because you're also getting joy out of it? Is probably what I would say to that.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you pay attention.
Yeah, it's so hard to separate out because I think so many, I love being with my kids too, and
Absolutely.
I think we all do to some extent, right? It's not, and it does bring me joy. However, there's a piece that gets intertwined that's hard to separate out. Is it mom guilt, or is it true joy? Is it really, like you're saying, helping to provide that self-care for you. Sometimes being with I think, so to answer your question, I think it can be in small doses.
Yes.
However, it's not it's not recharging you necessarily, in a way that separate hobbies can.
I think you're allowed to be like a mom. It's the whole point of this is not to try to remove being a mom and a hobby. It's just making sure that you recognize that there is a portion of you, like that's purely you, not you as a mom, not you as a businesswoman, but just you, authentically you in there. And I think there's nothing wrong with having that diversity in there of being a mom or being a wife and pulling that in there. But just make sure you also find that piece that is just truly just what brings you joy. All alone by yourself.
And we found, I think the other thing that comes to mind is like we found something like kind of magical has happened, or at least for me, Tam, you can speak to this, but I feel like having that set time carved out that's my time, it has had this magical effect of like, my kids miss me and I miss them, and you appreciate it more. But also it has kind of opened up this part of my brain that I lost of like the creativity and wanting to try new things. I found myself just having more fun in life, just generally across the board. We're not talking about a ton of time, maybe a couple of hours every week that is dedicated time for something else. So
Absolutely.
I get that. And if you're a mom who doesn't always enjoy being with the kids, you're not alone. Okay. Like, don't always enjoy being with my
them,
kids.
But man, do I also love missing them.
Right? Like, I feel like a hobby should be something that you don't feel like you need to take a break from. Like, you can just get into this flow state where you're just like, oh, where has time gone?
Yes.
I don't always feel like that with my kids. Sometimes I'm kind of like, man, it's only been 5 minutes. Like,
you've lived a lifetime before 8 a.m. Why is nothing open before 8 a.m. for kids? I don't understand.
I agree. That's a good point. You need to change that.
I know. Let's start this. This podcast today has now got a new mission. We're trying to get everybody to open up before 8 o'clock.
Because all the moms that work there are busy with their kids.
That's right.
That's true. That's true. Minor detail.
Minor. Very small.
So I shared something on my Instagram stories today, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fitting. So it's like this, static post. It says, I cannot stress enough how important it is to do silly, frivolous things that serve no other purpose than making you happy.
Yes.
And I feel like that kind of encompasses what a hobby is. I mean, it doesn't have to be silly. It could be something like knitting or, I don't know, making those crochet animals that are so adorable. Yes. I think they're called woobles or wobbles. I don't know, whatever. But they're so cute. So I think what we're all agreeing on is that as long as whatever it is that you're doing is serving you individually, not for the sake of other people, like, does it have the impact of helping other people? Cool. Like, that's a bonus. But like the main purpose of it is to serve you, to fill your cup up, to bring you joy that isn't dependent on someone else.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Awesome. So let's talk about why having a hobby is important in the first place, right? Because a lot of people are like, yeah, that's nice. When the kids are older, when they're more independent, then I'll have time to, rediscover myself. And they say this about marriage too, right? Like, oh yeah, I'll just put that on the back burner. And when I have more free time or more mental capacity, then I will nurture it and we can go on dates and, yada, yada, yada. But we as moms know, because none of us have newborns, right? So we're like, we're have
in the
experience.
Post phase. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So we know what happens when we don't prioritize ourselves.
Correct.
We know that there's always going to be something that fills in that void of time, right? It's like, oh, something is easier now. I'm going to fill it with more responsibility.
I can do the dishes now. I can do the laundry now. Those aren't fun.
Exactly. So how do hobbies play a role in our mental health as moms, our personal identity? Like, let's get into the good stuff here. Like, why is this important?
Well, I think you can break down what you kind of asked in a couple different layers. So, like, first of all, you talked about like just like honing in on just like the person itself, right? Like, I think hobbies, I mean, I think I can speak from experience being somebody who did kind of put all of my interests aside to kind of focus on raising kids and being a good wife and being a high achieving professional. And now I'm coming out on the other side of the fog. And, you get to a point where you're just like, what do I do for fun? Who am I? And I really thought I had this idea of who I was. I thought I was a very just like straightforward, direction following kind of person who really just I'm a planner, right? So unless I can plan it, I wasn't there for it. And I think hobbies are kind of breaking me personally out of that shell. It's encouraging me to kind of like you kind of suggest earlier about just being silly. Like I recently just took up skateboarding as a hobby and I feel like a total dweeb and I love it. Like, just kind of scooting around my neighborhood with my neighbors peeking out, wondering what this person is doing out there.
Also, they're like, I wish I could do that. I wish I was brave enough to do that.
Probably not. You should see what my
But
shin's
also, you're
like.
almost 40, so please be careful.
But I feel like, I keep trying these different hobbies. And with each hobby, I'm learning a little bit more that maybe I do really like creativity. Maybe I do really like, trying to find color in my life. Prior to this, I would say most of my wardrobe was black or faded black. I love faded black. I feel like I'm trying to, as you can see, I'm wearing a little red today with even a little bit of a print. I'm trying to bring it into other aspects. Yes. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of one portion of that, and I think the other portion is, like you said, it's easy to find things that fill your time that are just additional responsibilities. Like, oh, I've got a couple minutes. Okay, I guess I'll get to those dishes that I kind of didn't do last night, or I guess I'll do that laundry that I just wanted to buy one more day. Those things can wait, or you also have a husband or a partner who could absolutely assist in doing that to buy you that extra
and
time.
Kids.
And kids who can help with those things so that you could just get that spare couple of minutes to try to explore something you're interested in.
And I want to reframe that they're not helping. They are participating in being in the household. Like that's what it takes,
Correct.
right? For the husband, it's like, hey, if you were single, you'd be doing all this shit. So let's do this together, right? And also the kids, we are training them to be adults. They need to learn how to do it. And how do they do it? In the best practice grounds possible.
Participation, yes.
Yeah.
100%.
So how about you, Erin?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, like to speak to what Tam's saying, is that I think if you don't make time for yourself and you keep going, it's going to lead to burnout, which is such a hot topic right now.
1,000%.
I think that is what happened to me. And if you don't take that time, you really can't burn the candle from both ends. You can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to give back to yourself, and you don't realize you reach burnout until you're in it. And that's a scary place to be, So it's hard, and it's hard to dig yourself out of that. So definitely, like for young moms or people that are starting to become parents, it's huge to set those standards for yourself early before it becomes, because once you're in it, it's so much harder to start. When it's so easy to fill your days, like you're saying, with other things.
Oh yeah, you can always find excuse.
Yeah. So
100%.
And then the other thing is, I know for me personally, it has helped. Trying new hobbies has really helped to break down. Tim kind of touched on it, but perfectionism and anxiety, because trying new hobbies, especially if you're trying stuff you've never done before, like you're not gonna master it from the beginning. You're just not. Like it's such a weird thing when you become, because if you're a professional in your life, you've mastered something, right? And you feel like you get to the point where you feel like you don't really have to. You can get into that flow state, but when you start a new hobby,
autopilot,
it's just a different feeling. Like it's so like I started trying piano lessons, and I know I'm not musically inclined at all, and my husband was like, "I'm so proud of you because you're not getting upset for making mistakes. Like you have to make mistakes when you do that, and just that infiltrates your life too. You start to just have more fun." And I think too, getting your mind off of just the day-to-day monotony to helps to lift your mood and just be emotionally better for the other parts of your life. So.
Yeah, because I agree with you,
Oh my
Erin. I think
gosh.
like
Yeah.
once you're a happier, better version of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
that like flows out to the rest of the family.
Yeah,
Like kids are incredibly
definitely.
intuitive. They can tell when
Yeah,
mom is locked down and like not in it
definitely.
and very distracted,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then like even like through piano, like your boys were just so
Oh my gosh.
into
Yeah.
just destroying
Mm-hmm.
that keyboard.
They were. They really were.
I love it.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed you trying piano.
I love it. There's so many layers to what you just shared, Erin,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of want to like rewind a little bit and dive into some of those a bit more. So, like when you put yourself in a beginner mindset, that does so much for us, so much. I recently started tennis because I moved into a new state, and literally the only question people asked me was, "Do you play tennis?" And I'm like, "Should I play tennis?" So I was like,
Yeah, it sounds
so I'm
like
playing
it.
tennis because this is a great way to meet the neighbors. And so I started playing, and man, I like never picked up a racket ever in my life until I started playing this past August is when we started.
Okay.
Yeah. And my stepson loves to say this phrase, sucks to suck. I'm like, yeah, it does suck.
I
He's
love
not
that.
saying about me playing tennis, but I'm like, yeah, I'm really feeling this like sucks to suck. But I feel like it makes us way more resilient because the more scenarios we put ourselves in to feel uncomfortable, we grow our tolerance for discomfort. And this is so true with motherhood because we're like, oh, trial and error. We are just used to fucking shit up and having to fix it and
Absolutely.
pivot. Same for marriage.
Yep.
When you put yourself in uncomfortable positions, like having hard conversations, you become more resilient and capable of handling, oh, yeah, I'm not feeling good and I don't feel like I have to fight or I don't feel like I have to run away, right? And so there's just so many lessons that we can learn from putting ourselves in that position. And if you're not one of those moms who's like, oh, yeah, I love to meditate and that's how I take care of myself, Hobbies is actually a great alternative because it gets you into that same state of like peace and joy and that just creates a positive ripple effect,
Absolutely.
right? Like new moms, I want you to think about how you feel on the nights where they're waking up every 45 minutes. And then you're like, oh my God, I just got like a 5-hour stretch of
Getting
sleep.
sweaty thinking
You
about
feel
going
like
back
a
there.
brand new woman, right?
Yeah.
Like you feel like a brand new woman. And once you get used to getting solid sleep because your kids are older, you're still going to feel tired because your body's like, oh, I am back to getting what I actually need. And when you devote that time to hobbies, so like when I go play tennis or when I interview people on my podcast, because I actually view this as a hobby as well. It just ends up supporting my business, right? Or like doing other things. Cooking for me is a hobby.
Great.
I feel like a way better person. Like I am more silly with my kids. I am more flirty with my husband. I have way more patience and compassion for myself and other people. So like if you're saying, I don't have time for this, I can do this later, can your family handle you pushing it off?
Right. Absolutely.
Can you handle the guilt of you pushing it off, feeling like, oh man, I was a really shitty mom just now, or oh, I didn't need to pick that fight with my husband?
Absolutely.
So what can you share with moms to help them feel, not even feel less guilty, because we can't always control how we feel, but how can you support moms to handle the guilt, to manage the guilt that they might feel when taking time for themselves to take care of their mental health and doing hobbies and all that?
Great question. You know, like mom guilt is so big, and especially in the earlier years, it's almost overwhelming. I think that my recommendation would be to like start small and like really small, like even just 20 minutes, go for a walk outside, right? Just to get out of the house. And it's amazing that like every time you do it, you realize, oh, it actually, the world didn't fall apart and everybody did survive and my kids are fine. And they didn't actually.
Like that, don't we? We like over catastrophize what might happen. It's like, oh my gosh, like let me make sure that you have all the snacks and my husband's okay. And like and it's like,
he's an adult.
He can help himself too.
Yep.
Yeah, they will survive, right? So, you know, I think we all like to be in control of the situation, but if you just take those start with baby steps and you'll realize that it is okay. And then you can grow that into maybe an hour or two a week or whatever it ends up being that you feel comfortable with, and then you do work that out with your partner. You talk about that and communicate and figure out who's going to take charge of when. And but yeah, I think that the biggest advice I have is to start small. And you, like what you're saying, it has a ripple effect in your mentally that you start to get comfortable with it, and then it's just your new norm.
Yep. Yeah, like Erin's saying, we found that hobbies are kind of like an entry level to those who are just the beginners of trying to find self-care or refine them after babies. I think hobbies are something that are like mostly, in most cases, very tangible, very in front of your face and very visible to those around you. So when your family sees you doing the hobby, they kind of become aware of like, okay, I need to give mom that time, like give her space. And then as you yourself, mom, start to get more comfortable with that, we'll say guilt, get more comfortable with yourself, get more comfortable with taking that time for yourself, you'll find that you kind of start to move a little bit almost above the hobby level and kind of go into other arenas of self-care. And that you just kind of become comfortable with guilt. And the word guilt isn't really there anymore. It's more just my time.
This is what I do. This is just what I do. This is part of who I am.
I'm just a person being a person.
Right. And what's awesome is that we can start small. And I don't know if this is like Instagram diagnosed or if I'm actually this, but I feel like I have ADHD and I didn't know for like my whole life. And for me, what helps is if I'm like, I have to be like super, super baby step. I'm like, I'll just like do this one part of it. But you know what ends up happening? Then I feel more motivated to continue doing it. So like for me, I started walking every single morning now, right? I actually just came back from my walk for this. And at first I was like, I'm just going to do 1 mile and see how I feel.
How'd you do?
I ended up walking 3 miles.
That's great.
So it's like, it's just getting over that mental hurdle of like, oh, I got to go drive there and it might be cold. Or at the time when I first started, it was hot as hell because it's like humid. And I'm like, oh God, I'm going to be so sweaty. But you know what? Like I got started and I like started seeing people walking too. And you know, you're smiling back at them and it's beautiful. And even though I feel really like, I don't know, people hate this word, but moist. And you know, I'm like, oh God, it's uncomfortable. But I'm like, this actually is kind of nice. And I came home feeling so refreshed, like I freaking ran a marathon. And I was like, oh, I like this. I'm like, I wonder if I could go tomorrow. And so I went the next day and then I went the day after that. And now I've become the person that walks every weekday and sometimes on the weekend with my family. And now it's just like part of my routine. It just is who I am. And so if thinking about starting a hobby is like so overwhelming to you, like I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the mental capacity to plan around it. Just start small.
And even in that small aspect, Michelle, I've heard so far that you do like what we call like a private hobby where you're walking, it's just you're just walking. But then you also said you did tennis, which is more of like a community. So also when you're trying to think of like what hobby you want to do and how to start small, think about what the crowd around you looks like. Is it something that you want to do just by yourself and just figure out who you are individually? Or are you wanting to have a hobby that kind of gets you out of the house to meet new people that aren't just your toddlers and your husband? I think maybe even that can kind of help like narrow down what small looks like to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even like if you want to pick up reading, I also pick that up. I'm like, I'm just going to read 1 page every night. I'm going to have like super low standards for myself. But of course, I'm going to pick a book that's interesting to me, right? And now I'm like, oh shit, I got to go to sleep.
Yeah, that too. Sleep's so good.
Okay, so how do you suggest busy moms, because I feel like all moms will call themselves that. How do you suggest that they carve out time for their hobbies? If they're like, okay, this all sounds like an amazing idea. And now it's time to execute. I'm like, you know, it's so easy to just like give up on ourselves and break a promise that we make to ourselves because we're like, we can deal with it. But other people, we can't disappoint them because their life would suck. It's like, well, we're kind of making our life suck right now. So What can you suggest to help them get over that hurdle of like, oh, I actually need to like do stuff to make this happen?
I would say I think I personally still struggle with this, even with us being this far into our podcast. I mean, it's it's just not going to be perfect right away, right? But for me personally, I found having conversations with my husband and like saying, "Hey, I intend to take this time," because honestly, he's not the one preventing me from doing it. Like it's truly myself. You know, he is more than willing to give me the time. It's just I don't ask for it. So I would encourage, you know, the moms out there to really like take care of yourself, ask for it. You're allowed to ask for it. You shouldn't have to, but we put ourselves in this position in which we have to. And I think if you have that conversation with your partner, they'll also kind of help you stay accountable. And I think that's been a real help for me is my husband will be like, I've noticed you haven't done anything for your podcast in the last 2 days. I'm going to need you to get on that. As our producer, he's a little bit more invested. And I feel like that would probably be my biggest suggestion is have that conversation with your partner. Because I truly believe that like your partner and your family, they'll notice the change in you when you have that hobby. So they'll be very active in trying to support you and finding that time because you also won't be on them as much to do the dishes the right way. Who puts plates on the top shelf? I don't understand. It's bottom shelf. Craziness. Sorry, I'm not bringing up a conversation that just happened yesterday.
No, I mean, 100%. I mean, to add to that is accountability. I mean, that's the word that comes to mind. Finding some way to be accountable. Yeah, and I was going to say, speak to your, like, just putting it out there in the world, like putting it on your calendar or talking to your partner about it, saying this, you know, making it like, you know, I don't know, just, and finding, like, we're finding a friend to do something with or a class that you signed up for or just something that is going to help create that habit, you know, and over time you won't necessarily need that anymore.
Yeah,
but like when you're just getting started, you need that accountability to keep going. And like for us, we found each other and we keep each other accountable.
Yes.
But we've also had many conversations with our husbands to say like, hey, once a month on Fridays, I'm going to carve out 5 hours to go do this podcast, you know, and that's just how it is. And now that's expected. And at first that was a little bit challenging, but now it's normal. So like you said, it's part of our routine now.
What was that sentence that we just recently interviewed? She's a millennial mom therapist, Allie McQuaid. Her line is, what you should say is, if someone tries to interfere in that time, because obviously conflict's going to come up sometimes, you know, you're just going to have to adapt a little bit when you're in a family. But you could always say the phrase, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, truly. Like we have to protect that time. And I think a lot of us end up like, oh, well, let's see if something else more important comes up and then I'll decide if I'm going to do it. But what if you plan far enough ahead where you're like, okay, well, this one's kind of busy. I'm going to start next month before it fills up. Like this is what it means to prioritize yourself is you actually make decisions based on what you need. And then everything else that isn't urgent or important or a priority and is not aligned with the kind of life that you want to build, they get to fill in the cracks, not the other way around.
100%.
And so as soon as you block out time, you protect that shit like with your life.
Yeah.
You set your boundaries like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do that at this time. Are you available at this time? Right. Then you're still demonstrating, oh, like you're still important to me. I still want to make that happen, but let's make it happen in a way that's not sacrificing myself.
Yeah. Treat it the same way you would treat your kids going to a birthday party. You're going to make sure your kid gets to the birthday party, right? Make sure that you get yourself to that self-care time.
Or even a doctor appointment, right? Like it's important because that's a wellness check. It's just every day.
I know.
Yeah, it's your mental and emotional health on the line for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So we dove into so much, and I know that the listeners are going to take away so much from this episode because look, if you haven't gotten by now, like you need to do this to save your life. Get a hobby. And talk to your spouse about how you can do that, because not only will it help you become a better version of yourself, you're going to inspire your kids and your husband to do something for themselves as well.
Absolutely.
And you guys can just like continue to grow as a couple. Plus, it makes you more interesting. You have more stuff to talk about rather than, you know, you meet a mom at a park and they're like, "Oh, what do you have plans for?" "Oh, well,
another kid's
I'm gonna
birthday
go
party.
home, make my kids lunch, and then put them down for a nap, and then make dinner, and then go to sleep."
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Who wants to be friends with me if it's all I have to offer?
Yes. And you need something to look forward to. I feel like that alone makes life so much worth living, is when we have stuff to look forward to. And you get to create that for yourself. You don't have to be like, "Oh, my once every 5-year international trip with my family." Like, no. It could be like, "Oh, I can't wait to start this knitting pattern." I don't know why I'm talking about knitting.
I want to see some knitting. Are you a knitter?
I actually did knit in college. I would like knit on the way to class.
No way.
I don't know.
Why'd you stop, Mom?
No, actually, I don't know why. I was not good, and I didn't care to like pursue it to get better. I would just make scarves, and that's about it.
Well, that's great though, because I think that's also something to talk about. Is like, you know, as when you do those hobbies, also know when that's not bringing you joy. Just because you start the hobby doesn't mean you have to stay with it until all of time. If you don't like it, that's fine. There are so many hobbies out there. Let's find some together. You got this.
It's like, don't be scared to fail because it doesn't matter, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That. Yes. Okay, so before I let you guys go, can you share with our listeners what each of your hobbies are? So, Erin, like, what are some things that you've discovered that you? Oh, okay. No, let's make this more fun. What's something that you are super glad you started, and what's something that you're like, "Oh, that was not a good idea."
That's
much easier. I like that. Yes, Erin, go.
Oh gosh. So my least, well, let's see, my most. Just like the thing I'm enjoying the most is the piano. That's been really fun and pretty easy to kind of like just dabble in. My least favorite has been sourdough bread making.
Yes.
Ooh, you are one of those people, the COVID bakers.
She was started, baby.
Oh my gosh, it was so frustrating. I don't know how people do that.
I was on a campaign to try to get somebody to adopt her starter baby so it wouldn't die, but alas.
I did not appreciate having something else to take care of.
That.
It's terrible. It was terrible.
Yeah. It didn't last long, so yeah.
I love it.
How about you, Sam?
Okay, so let's see. So my favorite, I would say, has been skateboarding. I mean, like I said, my body isn't quite built to be a skateboarder anymore. But it was something I always wanted to do as a kid, but I just thought I wasn't cool enough to hang with that kind of crowd. So this podcast has afforded me the opportunity to circle back to that. And like I said, I just feel so silly, but like in the best way. Like
youthful. You feel
like
youthful.
Yeah. And you know, it's great is we talk about how, self-care is like carving out time for yourself. But in this scenario, I actually am kind of looking at the fact that my oldest is really enjoying skateboarding as well and seems to be a natural at it. So we kind of can do it together. So I can kind of dip from two buckets in that hobby, which I like. And then as far as the one I disliked the most would probably be calligraphy. I I don't even know where to begin. I just felt like I could never get off the ground with calligraphy. It was just too hard for my mind to figure out when to push and pull on the pen. And I honestly, I have terrible handwriting as it is. I'm Y2K generation. We type. We don't write anymore, folks. So my hand's literally I don't know how to make an F anymore. I don't know what you want from me.
Actually, it's a lot harder to write now. Yes. My hands get tired because I don't have the endurance anymore. So it doesn't help that I have carpal tunnel that I'm trying to improve. Yeah. So gripping a pen and knitting is not a good idea for me,
probably
right?
Not.
So I won't be going back to that.
I love it. Yes. No, it's exactly the poor thing.
I mean, that's getting older. Things just start breaking down.
They do. Oh my God, yes. Way faster.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being a part of this show. This was so much fun. Yeah. This is my first time interviewing two people at the same time. So before we just close this episode, which I'm very sad to do because you guys are so fun to talk to, can you share with the listeners how they can connect with you? Where's the best place to learn from you and get to know you better?
We are on, obviously, our podcast is called The Art of Hobbyness, spelled hobby with ness at the end there. Kind of a play on the art of happiness, because hobbies help you find that happiness. You can find us on any podcasting platform that you listen to. We also are on all socials at theartofhobbyness.com. We also do a little bit of Pinteresting. If you're ever kind of wanting to see what we're trying to do to research our next hobby, we do create some boards in which we kind of do our own think tank in there, but if you want to follow along, you can find us there.
How fun. I love it. Okay, so you're listening to a podcast, so it's super easy for you to hop on over to theirs, go check out their episodes, go give them a follow, subscribe, whatever your platform calls it. And if you love this episode, share it with someone, because you know a friend that's also a mom that needs to hear this and that needs to kind of like dig herself out of this foggy hole that motherhood has put her in. Okay, so help a friend out. And before I let you guys go, Tam, when I first met you, I mentioned that you and Erin kind of made me think of the Netflix series Nobody Wants This. And I told you to watch the show. So have you watched it, and what do you think about it?
I'm obsessed.
Yeah, I loved it. I wish there would have been more.
I
It was
know.
so good.
Why
I'm so
only
glad they're
one
bringing it back.
season? Give me more.
Yeah. So good.
I know. After I watched that, and then I met you, Tam, I was like, oh man, now I want to co-host. Because it just seems like so much fun.
It is. It makes it a lot of fun.
It really does. Doing this with my best friend. I mean, we literally are giggling. And, well, I'll say cackling. I would say cackling probably occurs more than anything.
Definitely.
I love it. I love it. Well, thanks again for being a part of the show. Listeners, again, if you love this, let us know. Reach out to us. DM Tam, Erin, myself. Let us know what you love most about this episode and what you are excited to try out so we can support you and cheer you on. And if you know someone that could benefit from listening to this episode, send it to them. And of course, if you love the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and Spotify. I would be so, so grateful. And you would bring a huge fat smile to my face when I get to read it. All right. I'll catch you back here on the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, please send me a message over on Instagram at Michelle Perta Coaching to let me know what you loved most about it. Hearing from my listeners is my absolute favorite. And if you've been loving this podcast, please leave a rating and review. This will help people like you find the show and get the help they need. Catch you here on the next episode. Bye.